Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I'd like to welcome the audience and those that are on Facebook and YouTube to Series 2 of the History of Muslims in the Americas. Today, and this is during the month of October, Islamic Heritage Month. Today we have Dr. Muhammad Al-Ahari, who is the author of over 30 books that explores some of the rich history, some of the early writings of the Africans that were brought here. We take a look at also Sheikh Dawood, his community in the 20th century. He looks real good at Bilal Muhammad and his works. He takes a look at some of the other Arabic writings, at least the book about 5 classical stories. So we are here today to learn so much of enlightenment with what Dr. Muhammad has been able to share and dig up. With no further ado, I'd like to present Brother Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. Today I'm going to focus on Bilal Muhammad of Sapelo Island, Georgia. He lived from around 1770 to 1857. He was originally born in Timbo, Guinea, and then took into slavery when he was a teenager. Initially brought to the Turk and Caicos Islands, and then later on to Sapelo Island, Georgia, where he spent the majority of his life. Some easy things you would think would be easy about somebody would be, what's their name? Bilal Muhammad. You have at least a half different ways of spelling his name, ranging from Bilali with a Y ending in a Y, but then you have Ben Ali, then you have Bilali Muhammad, and Ben Ali Muhammad, and all of the but his actual name is found in the slave records of Sapelo Island, Georgia, and in the Turk and Caicos Islands. Bilal Muhammad gave names to and traditions to his children. He wrote a manuscript in Arabic, and when he died as a Muslim, even after being away from Africa, away from places where there were majority Muslims for over 70 years. He still died as a Muslim. Bilal Muhammad was born in Timbu, Guinea. Timbu is a part of West Africa where the majority of the people are Fulani and Jahanki, as their ethnic group. People from that area in Africa would have been primarily Sufis and primarily Maliki, but there were some Shafis and there were later on, people that were Hanbali or Wahhabi, but that's been like a 20th century thing. Bilal, when it was brought into slavery when he was about 14 years old, taken to the Nassau Bahamas and eventually to the Turk and Caicos. He was brought from the Turk and Caicos to Sapelo Island between 1803 and 1808. And he eventually became the main overseer of the plantation on Sapelo. His wife, Phoebe, came with him, as did his daughters Margaret and Fatima and Bentu. He had 7 daughters and 12 sons, born during slavery. When he started, being under slavery, it was hard to practice Ramadan. It was hard to pray. It was hard to wear your traditional clothing. And on some plantations, they would force people to eat pork. They'd force people to have a non-Muslim name. But he was able to preserve Islam among his family and have a place that was safe enough that the Sapelo Island plantation eventually had 400 to 500 Muslims on that slaves on that plantation, and of them, at least 100 of them were Muslim. He was actually saved the plantation and the inhabitants of the plantation on 2 occasions. One of them was during the War of 1812, and one of them was during a hurricane. During the War of 1812, Bilal Muhammad and Salih Bilali on St. Simon's Islands were among the only slaves or free slaves that actually had weapons that were able to fight against the British. And the interesting thing about the British fighting in the War of 1812, the British offered freedom to people who fought on their side. If you go to Trinidad and Tobago, on those islands, the first Muslim society set up on Trinidad and Tobago were descendants of people from the Sea Islands that fought for the British and gained their freedom. Okay, so when Thomas Spalding, who was the person that held Bilali and other people in servitude, when he asked for them to fight and gave them weapons, he didn't have to worry that they were going to turn against him, because Bilali said he will be responsible for anybody that's Muslim on the island. So there must have been enough Muslims that he felt that it would be that he could have them fight, and that he would be responsible for them. The second occasion was in September 14th, 1824. There was a hurricane that flooded the island. Later on in the 1890s, there was another hurricane that flooded the island. So there were low-lying areas, so if the water rose 8 or 10 feet, it would flood the whole island. So Bilali was able to save them by moving them into places where they stored cotton and where they stored sugar. And they built those places to store cotton and sugar, and for the main plantation, and out of something called tabby. In tabby, they get lime and they get oyster shells, and they heat it up and burn it with I think it's oak, the wood they use to burn it. And when they heat it enough, it changes the organic composition of it, so it becomes more like cement. So that is all we really knew about Bilali up until 20th century. But there was one person, Joel Chandler Harris, that took the little bit we knew of him, what I just told you, and he made 4 novels where he was featured as a main character. He had Aaron, so-called son of Ben Ali, Plantation Pageants, Aaron of the Wild Woods. All of them had Bilal Muhammad as a character in them. So if he was brought over to the Americas and over to the Bahamas as a teenager, how much education, how much would he have actually knew about Islam? Well, the one manuscript we have of him that the one manuscript that we have from him shows that he knew how to write about how to pray. He knew how to write about the positions of prayer, the words you say at different parts during the prayer. The manuscript shows that he knew enough about Islam to discuss what you have to believe as a Muslim. That you have to believe in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You have to believe in the angels. You have to believe in the bridge that's between between the day of judgment and heaven or in hell. That you believe that that you have a book of deeds that's written on the day of judgment and given to you. So when he was on those, in the Turk and Caicos, when he was in the Bahamas, when he was on Sapelo, he raised families, and he had to be able to transmit his knowledge of Islam, names of the families, the diet, the way you dress, everything. He had to transmit those deeds, those customs to his family. And he was able to do that to such an extent that one woman, Georgia Conrad, wrote about him when she, in 1901, she visited him in the 1850s, but she wrote a description on Sapelo near Darien. I used to know a family of Negroes who worshiped Muhammad. They were tall, well-formed, with good features. They conversed with us in English, but talking amongst themselves, they used a foreign tongue. The head of this tribe was an old man called Bilal, who always wore a cap that resembled a Turkish fez. These Negroes held themselves aloof from others as if they were conscious of their own superiority. So Bilal's daughter Bintu spoke English and French. The others spoke English and Arabic. It was probably English and Fulani, not Arabic. And he has one manuscript, like I said, that's extant, that's in Arabic script. It's 13 pages long. If you count the words, it's about 750 words in the manuscript. So it's not a long manuscript. So one thing that's missing, we do know what Bilal's name is, but we don't know what his parents' names are. We know what the name of his children are, but we don't know what school he went to, who his teachers were. Those are all things that we, if we were able to go to Tembu, maybe we'd be able to find. If we went to the Turks and Caicos Islands, or we went to Chantilly, the plantation that Spalding had on the mainland, there might be some more records in there about who Bilal was. Okay, so why would Spalding want somebody that's a Muslim, that's a practicing Muslim, to run their plantation? And he gave him a lot of freedom to run the plantation. So why would he want that? Because Bilal learned when he was on the Turk and Caicos, and possibly even in Africa, how to grow rice, how to grow cotton, how to do a timeshare system to manage the plantation, where the people that are running the plantation had time that they could work for themselves and time they could work for the plantation. And Spalding actually wrote about a dozen articles about how to raise cotton, how to raise indigo, how to do time-share work on the plantations. And as far as I know, none of those articles even mention Bilal. But a lot of the ideas that he used about how to do those things had to come from somebody that practiced it, because Spalding did not grow up in a family as a farmer, so he had to learn all those techniques from somebody else. So Bilal, he taught Spalding how to raise cotton. He set up the system on the plantation that worked to such an extent that he eventually was able to take over the whole island, and take over Blackbird Island, take over Little Spalding Island, and take over some of those hammocks that are there, like Pumpkin Hammock and Jack Hammock. Okay, so when Bilal wrote his manuscript, a lot of people knew that he wrote in Arabic, but people weren't able to read it. It seems like a manuscript, the way I described it, listing what you believe in as a Muslim, how to make wudu, how to pray, the prayers, the words you say at different positions during prayer, and the dua that you say to close the prayers. It seems like that stuff should be simple enough anybody could read it. that knew some Arabic. But he wrote it where in West African script, and he wrote it in Ajami script, which in some cases might actually confuse certain letters in Arabic. And some of the letters he might confuse are the sin and the sheen in Arabic, the ta and the kaf and the qaf. He might confuse the lam and the wa. That's why they might say, instead of saying salah, they said salah. They changed the sa and the sin. Instead of saying thalatha, they say salatha, for when you're counting. So another problem that made the manuscript hard to read is sometimes the ink would bleed from one side of the page to the other. So you would almost have to hold it up to the light to read it. In Arabic, if they want to show something's genitive, nominative, accusative, what part of speech it is, they would put a fatha, like a line above a letter, a kasra, a line below a letter, or a duma, it looks kind of like a wow above the letter, to show whether you say ah or e or u, to show what part of speech it was. Bilal did that in his manuscript, and sometimes he followed Arabic conventions, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he broke the words in the correct places, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he would write a long vowel instead of a short vowel. So that would make it difficult to read. So when you study, there's actually sciences to study how you put long and short vowels and how letters might be confused in readings, and that's called tashif. And it's studied as a part of hadith studies because they study how the Prophet Muhammad and how the people that transmitted a hadith, how they said certain words. Once you go through the manuscript and you figure out those patterns of letter exchanges and the confusion between long and short vowels, and where words might be broken in the wrong place, or where they might have the wrong letter for the wrong position written in the word, like you might have in the middle of a word the position for the letter at the end of a word in some places in Bilal's manuscript. Once you figure out all those, you can read the manuscript. Bilal passed this manuscript before his death. The strange thing about his death, it was either in 57 or 59. There's a book by William Brown Hodgson. It's called About London, who wrote a manuscript in Arabic that was actually English, that was the Gospels, that started out, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, for the first chapter of John. And in that manuscript, he talks about Bilal. He tells that he lived on Sapelo, he was friends with Salih Bilal, and that they supposed he wrote manuscripts in Arabic, and the manuscripts were passed on after he died, and he died in 57, but he might have died in 59 because the manuscript on the cover, it says published 57, but it could be 59. And he gave the manuscripts to Reverend Francis R. Goulding, and his son wrote about Bilal and his father meeting each other on Sapelo, Maine. Sapelo, Maine is, I was asking you about, Crescent, if you knew where that was. That's Sapelo, Maine. So when it went on Sapelo, Maine, Bilali had a cabin there, and he met with Spalding's father. And when he met with him, his father, why would a minister meet with a slave to try to get him to be a Christian? So that's where the one place that it says Bilali became Christian is in the notice from Spalding's son about him meeting with his father. And almost everything in those notices that it says about Bilali, it's identical to what Joel Chandler Harris said in his books. So it's kind of obvious that either Spalding's son never met Bilali or really didn't know anything about him, or his father really didn't tell him anything about him. So what else do we know about Bilali? We know that he probably lived around the area called Behavior, which was near the Behavior Cemetery. We know that he had a cabin on the mainland that might have been destroyed in the 1898 hurricane that destroyed the school that was on Crescent. That was a boarding school for white men, white boys on the cliff there. That's why it was called Crescent, because it had a crescent shape. So we haven't been able to trace all of Bilali's relatives. We haven't been able to trace where his actual house was, whether he actually had a mosque, if he wrote other manuscripts, or if the pages that are missing in his manuscript, where they are located. So now I'm going to actually move on to the manuscript. So this is some depictions of Bilal Muhammad. The one on the left side is from Joel Chandler Harris's book, Aaron, so named son of Ben Ali. And the one on the right side is from Baba Kenya. You've met Baba Kenya.
Don't I recognize that picture?
Yeah. He drew that picture, and he allowed me to use it for his cover.
I thought I recognized that.
Yeah. And in his hand, he has the long stem cotton that Bilali taught Spalding how to grow. This is Shad Hall, Bilali's great-grandson, and people said that Bilali looked like him. So I would have preferred that Baba Kenya would have used that picture, but he drew a picture. It's a good picture. I love the picture, but I don't know if it actually looks how Bilali actually looked. The picture on the right side is from Shell Hammock. It's one of the three praise houses that existed on Sapelo. And if Bilali actually had a place that he prayed in, it would have probably been one of them. There was another one that existed at Hanging Bull, but I think just I didn't go into the woods where it exists because it was off the road, so it's not necessarily safe to be walking through the woods when you have rattlesnakes and stuff.
Wild bull.
Yeah. I don't think it's called wild bull because he hung a wild bull.
No, that's
I think it's
wild bulls out there.
Yeah, I think it's called wild bull because they actually hung slaves that revolted.
And they got wild bulls on there.
Yeah, they have wild bulls on the island too. These are prayer beads. They're made out of blue glass. They weren't from Sapelo. I found these online looking around. So, but there were blue glass beads that were found in Florida, but I think they were from prayer beads for Catholics. Where they say Hail Mary and all that on. So the picture of this, I'm pretty sure this is a storehouse for tobacco. But this picture was from 1910, and that was if the houses that you have pictures of from Sapelo would have been in good repair, that's probably what they would look like. This is the picture of the mosque that Bilali would have probably gone to in Timbu. And this is a copy of the colophon from a copy of the Risala from Songhai from the 16th century. So that's the oldest available copy of the complete Risala from Africa. Okay, this is Bilali's manuscript. It's the first page in the inside of the first cover. This word here says dhikrat, like to remember or to think about. That's what this is right here. So that's where I got the idea. And Bilali called his manuscript his Meditations. So that's where I got the idea that that's probably the title. And it's on the inside cover. It kind of looks like this word here. It's what he called the manuscript, so that's where I got the idea from. If you look right here, it says 15. So maybe it's telling you how many pages it has. So if there's pages missing, it might be one, front and back of one page. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm saying something that's kind of obvious. So this starts off, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Salli Allah alayhi Sayyidina Muhammed wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam at-taslima. That's a prayer that many, many manuscripts start with. So you're giving blessings to the Prophet Muhammad, to his family, to his companions, to the people around him. And then it says Kala Sheikh Ofiki Abu Muhammad Abdullah ibn Yusuf bin Ubaid al-Qarawani al-Rahimullah wa'anahu. So he said, thus said, and this is how we know it's from the Risala, because he tells you right there that Abu Muhammad, the Sheikh of Fiqh, Abu Muhammad bin Yusuf bin al-Qarawani, he's the one that wrote it. So that's how we know that that's where you got the idea, the manuscript. And then here, when somebody dies or you respect them, you say, may Allah bless their soul, forgive them. That's what's afanu, forgive them. And then you notice this big thing right here, Bab. That means chapter. So that's a chapter heading. So if somebody's writing a chapter heading, a title, later on they're correcting some words on the side of a page, aren't those signs that you know how to read and write? And then further on down here, this remember the book of books, and then he continues another prayer, where on the next page he lists the four Khalifa Rashidun. Okay, and then this is the Khalifa Rashidun are listed here: Muhammad, Thumma Abu Bakr, Thumma Uthman, and you see crossed out Uthman here because he should have had Umar. Again, he knew what he was writing. And then next he says that if there's any time Muslims are button heads with each other, especially when you're talking about Umar or Uthman or those early people, ignore it. They had their disagreements. We shouldn't talk about their disagreements. We should talk about them being good people, them that we should follow as examples. So then I'm going to go through the whole translation. I think it's going to waste time if I just line by line tell you what it is. But this page is probably, and the next couple pages are the ones where almost nobody's translated anything because they're really hard to read. Because you could see there's ink bled here, there's ink bled here. The writing becomes much harder to read. And this, like I said, this part on the side, it's where he's correcting something over here. So again, he's showing he knew what he was writing. Over here, again, this is Bab, and then this wudu, here he says Lulu. So that's where he's confusing a lamb with a dog. So that page, this page is where he's talking about how to pray. First you start out making wudu, and then he starts talking about, after you make wudu, you say, so after you make your wudu, you would say the shahada, and then you would get ready for your prayer. And you would get ready for prayer. First you would say your sunnah prayer, you would call the adhan, you would call the iqama, and that's what the next two pages are.
And within it, doesn't he make the difference between the distinction between the
He makes a
adhan
distinction between the adhan and the iqama. How many times you say each part. And at the end, I'm going to go through the translation now, so you can hear the whole translation. So part of the issues with translating the manuscript, like I said, it's hard to read because of ink bleeds. It's non-standard spelling or orthography. That's where you might write a letter that should be in the middle of the word. You write it like it's at the end of a word. So you might be confused with letters. Pages were missing. There's no colophon, so we don't know when it was written. We don't know why it was written. We don't know the name, the actual name of who wrote it, other than somebody else said Bilal Muhammad wrote it. We don't have other manuscripts by Bilal to compare the writing to, so we can see if there's a standard way that he wrote. Also, part of the problem with translating this is that if you look at people that tried to translate it before, they didn't translate the whole manuscript. They mistranslated words. They misunderstand the nature of the manuscript. And they conflated the ideas of literacy and literature that they had in Europe with the ones they had in Africa. So they were mixing apples and oranges. So now I'm going to go over, I'll just read the translation, because I know that nobody's heard the whole translation before. In the name of Allah, the merciful, the most merciful, peace and blessings of Allah be upon our Master Muhammad and his descendants, and those that remember Allah. And that word, when you remember Allah, it's dhikr. So that's later on he talks about the idea of saying Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. This was said by the Sheikh of Islamic law, Sheikh al-Fiqhiyah, Abu Muhammad bin Yusuf bin Ubayd al-Qarawani. May the mercy, blessings, and forgiveness of Allah be upon him. And then it says Qadir Allahu Amira or Amira. So that part is hard to read. I am commanded to write a book that gives the obligatory rules at your hand. So Al-Qayrawani, when he wrote the Risala, he wrote it because somebody asked him to write a book that teach the basic rules of how to fast, how to pray, how to believe in God. And he wrote it when he was 17 years old. So Bilal Muhammad if he was studying this book when he was 14, 15 years old, he's about the same age as that Kairouani was when he wrote it. So what should you know as a Muslim? There's these ideas of what's fard, what's fard kifaya, what's fard for everybody to know, what's fard for the head of a family to know, what's fard for the ruler to know. Like the levels of knowledge that people have to have in Islam are not identical for each person in the community. So these actions are the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. There's what's obligatory, what's Sunnah, what makes you a Muslim. You have to pray, you have to fast. How do you pray? How do you fast? So you have the Sunnah that is obligatory, the Mu'akkada, what is optional, which is nafila, what is commendable, ragiba. So, and then you have the idea that as a Muslim you have a certain behavior that you have to have. And he went over those in the manuscript. So, this is what we told and this is what we described. So he's saying, this is what we wrote down, and this is how we did it, and this is why we did it, and inshallah you'll gain some from it. So I think it's interesting that the part of the Risala that Bilali chose to do would have been that paragraph where he was telling why Kairouani wrote the Risala in the first place. And I will take this chapter by chapter so that Allah willing, inshallah, it will be easy to learn. So he has a very systematic way that he laid out the Risala. And Bilali's meditations is not identical to the Risala. There's differences. So we seek goodness and assistance for Allah to help us on the straight path. There is no strength but Allah. He is the highest and the most powerful. So, and then again, he says a prayer to the Prophet Muhammad, and he says, and to his companions, and then he lists who the Khalifa Rashidun are, and he made a mistake when he listed them, and he corrected his mistake. Okay, and then that's the part where he tells that you should respect the Sahaba equally. You shouldn't make a big fuss about any disagreements they had. Okay, so then this is the part where he starts listing what you have to believe to be a Muslim. You have to believe in heaven and hell. You have to believe in the bridge that goes over hell. You have to believe in the scales that balance, your good deeds and your bad deeds. You have to believe the angels that write down your good and bad deeds. So he's saying when you die, what's going to last after you? Your good deeds, the prayers people say for you. What if you built a school or a well or you planted a tree, stuff like that last after you. Your money's not going to last after you. What's going to last is your reputation. And then the third page, it's kind of repetitive, but he's saying, what we have to do is watch what our hands do, watch what our mouth does, watch where our feet go, make sure whatever's in our heart is pure intention. Okay, so and then he repeats that again over on the next page. And he reminds us about the book of deeds again. And in the Quran, it tells you how you get your book of deeds. Either you get it in your right hand, your left hand, or behind your back. So if you get it in your right hand, you must have done a lot of good stuff. You're really proud to get it. If you got it in your left hand, maybe you're ashamed. You'd be ashamed to get it. Now, if you're getting it behind your back, that's even worse than getting it in your left hand. Okay, and then he says the Sirat is real. That's a path over heaven and hell. People go over it at different speeds by what deeds they do. The more evil person, the slower they go over it, the harder it is to go over it, and the narrower it becomes, the more evil the person is. And then he says, I seek protection from the trials of life and death, from the trials of the grave, from the trials of the Antichrist, from the torments of the fire and the evil end, and the peace and blessings be upon the Prophet Muhammad. That's the prayer you say after, right before you say Salam Alaikum, Salam Alaikum, in your prayer. Then he goes into actually how to make wudu. You wash your right hand, your left hand, your mouth, your face, this part of your hair. You do it from the right side to the left side, from the top to the bottom. Your right foot, then your left foot. And then he says the prayer that you say when you finish it. So as a Muslim, you have to make sure that you don't make shirk, that you don't take partners with Allah, that you remember that Allah is everlasting, that He controls life and death. That's kind of like Ayatul Kursi. But that's not Ayatul Kursi, it's a little different wording. And then he gives the adhan, and he gives, so he gave the Iqama before, now he gives the adhan here, then he gives the Iqama later. And he has some places where it's really hard to read. So people have mistranslated this part that should have been very obvious. People have mistranslated it.
Could you see that he even has the morning portion?
Right, he says this prayer is better than sleep because he's talking about the morning prayer.
Yeah.
So after that, he says, after you make your 2 rakas, so he makes a difference between Salatul Subha and Salatul Fajr. He makes one of them Fard and one of them Sunnah. So even the name of the differentiating between the Sunnah and the Fard prayer, that's very Maliki oriented. That makes even the way he talks about it unique. And so after you say your prayer, you sit back in the back of the mosque and you say your dhikr, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. And then you say, Wala huwa wala quwwata illa billah. So you do that until when? Till the sun comes up. And then what do? You go work. So if you start your day out with prayer, you start your day out with dhikr, how's your day going to end? This first part was about the Sunnah prayer, then the next part's about the Fard prayer, because the Iqama. So if you start your prayer out with, if you start your day out with prayer, you start your day out with dhikr, you start your day out rising before sunrise, you're going to start out with success. And then he's telling what you say at the different positions. So, Sami Allahu Hamida, Rabbana Lakal Hamd, and then what you say when you're in sajda. So, and about asking for forgiveness for your sins. So, and then giving salams upon the Prophet again. And then he tells that you should stay in a state of prayer and dhikr until the sunrise. That's like the best way to do it. So what do we need to learn that we don't know about Bilal so far? We need to know if missing pages of his manuscript exist. We need to know what his 12 sons' names are. We need to know where he actually prayed on Sapelo, if he did pray on Sapelo. We need to know if the cabin that he lived in Sapelo, Maine, if it still existed. We need to go to Timbu and find out, do we know anything about his family there? Who could his possible teachers there be? What books might still exist from the time that he lived in Timbo. There's a dialect of English called Gullah or Geechee, and there are words that came into that language from Bilali. We need to study more about his possible influence on that language. And then we have to know where he's buried, and we have to question what is his actual heritage that could be carried on, and what can we do to preserve it. And I think having a full translation of his manuscript, and I'm working on a second volume, which be a line-by-line commentary, comparing it to other books of Sufi books and other books of Maliki fiqh that have similar topics. And I've written about 80 pages so far, but it's going to be longer than the translation that I did. So I think doing things like that, are necessary.